Chapter 17. This comes from the official NASA Procedures for Contact with Intelligent Extraterrestrial Life manual. Military presence. Sadly, we cannot rule out the possibility, no matter how disturbing, that IEL will come here for hostile reasons rather than for peaceful ones. Thus, any response to their arrival mandates the activation of U.S. armed forces. DEXA has worked at length with the U.S. military to form an IEL action plan, or ELAP, which will be initiated immediately upon the first sign of primary contact. Rest assured, the military's presence will only be a precautionary measure rather than an aggressive one. The ELAP clearly states that the military is to respond only with defensive action and therefore cannot attack, assault, strike, or provoke the IEL or their craft in any way without provocation. Crisis mode. Lunar day 252, T-minus 10 minutes to emergency evac. We had all rehearsed evacuation procedures many times. NASA mandated that we had to do it once a month, and Nina occasionally threw in a bonus fake emergency just to keep us on our toes. We never really evacuated, as that was considered too dangerous, but we at least went through the motions so that we would know where to go and what to do, and what everybody's job was. Unfortunately, there'd been no way to completely prep for an actual emergency, because the circumstances of an actual emergency were very different. We always knew that the rehearsals were rehearsals, and that if we screwed up, we wouldn't die. But now it was real, and that created a very different mindset. No matter how much we had practiced not panicking, most of us were now on the edge of panic. And to make matters worse, since our oxygen levels were already low, none of us were thinking as clearly as we should have been. Now, some people, like Mom and Dad and Chang, appeared to be thinking more clearly than others, but they were working at it, almost willing themselves to fight off hypoxia long enough to function. Others, like Dr. Brahmaputra Marquez, succumbed too quickly. She was laughing giddily and talking to an imaginary kangaroo. To my surprise, Dr. Marquez turned out to be one of the competent people. Seeing that his wife was in trouble forced him to step up his game. He tended to Dr. Brahmaputra Marquez while also helping Radi and Inez. Inez was probably doing the worst of anyone, but at least she was still conscious and able to follow directions. Cesar Marquez may have been the calmest of everyone, although that was probably the result of the sedative his mother had given him. He emerged from the medical bay looking serene and well-rested, although possibly a bit spaced out. "We're evacuating?" he asked. "Cool. That sounds fun." Now, the first order of business was to get oxygen. Emergency canisters of it were bolted to the walls throughout MBA, the same way that fire extinguishers are everywhere in buildings back on Earth. Those adults who still had their faculties grabbed the canisters as quickly as they could, while still taking care not to go too quickly. Anyone who moved too fast would increase their heart rate and breathing speed, which would only make them more hypoxic. The canisters all had transparent face masks to fit over the user's nose and mouth, and these were connected to the oxygen supply by tubes. They looked very much like the face masks that drop down on an airplane if the cabin depressurizes. The procedures for using them were the same as on an airplane as well. Mom, Dad, and Chang each took a few breaths off their canisters first, making sure that their minds were thinking straight before turning their attention to helping everybody else. Meanwhile, I led Violet toward the airlock staging area, knowing our parents would meet us there with the oxygen. There wasn't any time to spare waiting around for them. I was trying to soothe Violet and keep her from getting scared, although she was too looped out to really grasp what was going on. Instead, I was ending up getting scared because she was acting even sillier than usual.
"You know what else I'd like besides a unicorn?" she asked. "Some dinosaurs. The ones that are all gray and fuzzy and adorable with huge ears."
Violet, I said, I think those are koalas.
"Yeah, great, koalas. Yeah, that's what I want."
Nina came rushing down from her residence, toting the emergency canister from her room, the mask already strapped onto her face. Because of this, she was completely clear headed and began barking orders. I didn't really grasp what she said, though, because it was all highly technical. I wasn't in the best frame of mind, and none of it was directed at me anyhow. Chang, placate the orbital dingus flange. Stephen and Rose, diffuse the bicaudal ventricles. Daphne, oscillate the flammable terrapins. Or something like that. The Schobergs burst from their residence like a herd of spooked cattle, shoving one another out the way and all yelling that they ought to be first to evacuate. Although they had 2 emergency canisters in their suite, they hadn't remembered to bring either one. And through it all, sirens kept wailing and the base computer continued calmly announcing that we needed to evacuate immediately. Whoever had programmed this had probably expected that it would be soothing, but it had the opposite effect, like someone repeatedly reminding you that you only had a few minutes left on a math test when you were trying to focus on the test itself. Mom raced over to Violet and me with her oxygen canister. She clapped the mask over my nose and mouth before I could even protest that Violet should have it first. My first breath of oxygen had a startling effect. My head cleared almost instantly, as though a cloud had evaporated inside my skull. I immediately grasped exactly what I had to do next and how to do it. After a few more breaths, we forced the mask onto Violet's face. I saw clarity return to her eyes within only a few seconds. Both of you, suit up to go outside, Mom said. I have to stay back here and fix the system.
What?
Violet asked worriedly.
Why?
Because it has to be done, and I know how to do it, Mom said. Your father's coming outside with you, but he has to work on the problem out there, so I need you 2 to stick together. She shifted her focus to Violet. Now your brother's in charge. Stay close to him and do what he says, all right? Now normally Violet might have protested, but now she grasped that this was important and that she had to listen.
All right,
Mom said. It's a good thing your father checked your suit with you today, so we know that it still fits.
It does, Violet agreed, although it's a little tight. I've grown 2 inches since we got here.
2 inches? My goodness. Well, your grandparents won't even recognize you when you get home. Mom's tone was light and easygoing, but I knew that it was an act to keep Violet calm. Worked like a charm, though. Violet didn't seem very worried despite everything that was going on, and even I felt a bit more relaxed myself. Now, even though this is an emergency, Mom continued, we still have plenty of time to evacuate. You don't need to rush putting your suits on. Let's take it easy and not make any mistakes. I'll stay with you until you get into the airlock and make sure everything's done right. I opened the spacesuit storage and started removing our gear. Mom stayed close by with the emergency oxygen, helping us out and giving us breaths from the mask so that our minds stayed clear. Kira was a few feet away getting her suit while her father helped her. Suddenly, someone shoved me from behind. Out of the way, idiot, Patton Schoberg snarled. He snatched his own suit from storage, nearly clocking Violet in the head with his helmet.
You want it, you big bully,
Violet shouted. Patton sneered at her, and I got the sense that if he hadn't been in such a hurry to get out of the base, he would have shoved her down just to make her cry. Then he set about putting his suit on. Nearby, none of the other Schobergs were behaving much better. They were rudely jostling people aside, mostly children, in order to grab their suits, as if the rest of us were merely objects that had gotten in their way. Since the Schobergs had skipped many of the emergency meetings, they were at a loss as how to put on their suits properly. Lily was trying to put her boots on the wrong feet, even though they were very clearly labeled left and right, while Sonia was putting her suit on backwards. Given their rude disregard for the rest of us, I wouldn't have been surprised if no one bothered to help them suit up. But Nina came to their rescue. Listen up, she ordered them. I'm going to show you how to get your suits on properly. Now pay close attention, or you will die. The Schobergs all clammed up and actually listened as she explained what to do. I held out Violet's suits for her, and she clambered into it. Dad came along. He had a large red toolkit, marked emergency in 5 languages. Everything all right here? He asked us calmly, as though we were merely packing the car for a day at the beach. We're good, I told him. Great, he said. Well, I'm going to suit up. Now don't go without me. Then he went off to retrieve his own spacesuit. Dr. Marquez had given Dr. Brahmaputra Marquez oxygen, and so now she appeared to have regained her senses and was ordering her children around like a drill sergeant. Cesar and Inez were already halfway suited up, although Roddy was having trouble. He was obviously fighting panic, and his refusal to work out over the past few months was coming back to haunt him. He barely had the strength to support his heavy suit. I knelt and started to snap Violet's boots onto her feet. I can handle that, Dash, Mom said. It's time for you to get ready yourself. So I got back to my feet and climbed into my own suit. Even though Mom was letting me have puffs of oxygen when I needed them, the chaos and the stress of the evacuation were starting to wear on me. It probably didn't help that, except for a brief nap, I'd been awake since 2 a.m. I had to focus so closely on suiting up and not making mistakes that I stopped noticing what was going on around me. It was as though the periphery of my range of sight had slipped away. My vision was tunneling slightly due to the lack of oxygen. I was vaguely aware that, despite Nina's insistence that the Schobergs double and triple checked to make sure that their suits were on safely, that they had completely ignored this in their rush to get outside. Additionally, Chang made an announcement that, to speed up the evacuation, some people ought to come to the emergency backup airlock in the gym with him, but I didn't notice who actually went. When everyone was wearing matching spacesuits, it was very hard to grasp who was who. Eventually, I got my suit on properly, and Mom got Violet into hers. It was so heavy, it was difficult for Violet to move around in it, even though she'd been doing her exercises. A group of 5 people passed into the main airlock and shut the door behind them, preparing to go outside. Because they were suited up, I had no idea which 5 people it was. I clamped the helmet down over my suit and locked it into place. The clamor of the alarms faded and the suit's oxygen system activated. Now my clarity of mind wouldn't be yo-yoing as my oxygen level rose and fell, which was a relief. Mom locked Violet's helmet into place as well, which gave Violet a steady oxygen supply too. Mom could now affix the mask from her emergency canister over her face and breathe easy for the first time since the emergency had begun. You each have at least 5 hours of oxygen in your tanks, Mom told us. She had to yell so that we could hear her through our helmets. Although it will last up to twice as long if you don't overexert yourselves and focus on breathing slowly. That means no goofing off around out there. Stay close to the base, keep within sight of each other, and take the time to enjoy the view. How's your oxygen? I asked. Fine, Mom said, pointing to the indicator on her canister. It was well into the green safe zone, and there are plenty more of these. We're going to get this problem fixed long before you need to come back in. Now let's put you guys on radio channel 17 so you can communicate with me and with each other. Violet and I switched over to channel 17. Can you hear me? I asked her.
I can, Violet exclaimed. Hi, Lucio.
Great, Mom shouted, and then plucked the radio from her belt and spoke to us through it. Now let's do your safety checks. Another group of Moonies stepped into the airlock. The first group had already headed out onto the surface. Along with Dad, who was currently snapping his helmet on, we were the only people in suits left inside the base. Either we were being pokey or everyone else wasn't exercising as much caution with suiting up as we were. Dad clicked to channel 17 and we all went through our safety checks. There no longer seemed to be such a big hurry as we were in our suits with our own personal oxygen supplies, so even if the oxygen in the base suddenly disappeared, we'd be okay. For the next few hours, at least. Eventually, Mom and Dad pronounced that our suits were on properly. Mom gave us each a kiss on our helmets, warned us once again to stay together, and then headed off to deal with the oxygen crisis. Dad, Violet, and I stepped into the airlock and shut the door behind us. The chamber depressurized, and then the indicator light turned green, signaling that it was safe for us to head outside. We opened the outer door and stepped onto the surface. Even though I had been outside less than 24 hours earlier, everything felt different this time. The lunar surface itself looked exactly the same since the slow rotation of the moon meant the sun was still up, and would be for days to come. But everything else was different. On my previous venture outside, Dad had been in charge, looking after me. This time, I was the one with responsibility taking care of Violet, which added a whole extra level of stress to the anxiety I already felt. And this time, it was crowded. Before, Dad and I had had the whole moon to ourselves. Now there were people everywhere. Now, obviously, the actual number of moonies outside was small given the size of the moon itself, but still, no matter where I looked, there was someone in a spacesuit. With the reflective visors down on their helmets, I couldn't tell who anyone was. Everybody looked exactly the same. The only exceptions were Violet, Kamoze, and Inez, who were so much smaller than everybody else that they looked like dwarf astronauts. "I'm heading to the other side of the base to the oxygen regulators," Dad informed Violet and me over Channel 17. "Now both of you stay here, close to everyone else. The moment we get this fixed, you'll be able to head back inside. Since you're the youngest, you ought to have priority." "Okay," I replied.
Gotcha, Violet said. Have fun.
Dad laughed. I'll do my best," he said, and then waved goodbye and bounded toward the northern side of the base. The sound of his breathing cut out from my radio, which meant that he had switched to a different radio channel, probably so he could talk to Mom and Chang about the repairs without Violet and me interrupting. I watched him disappear behind the rover garage and then turn back to Violet. She was gone. I had a moment of panic, and then I spotted her running across the lunar surface. Or should I say, doing her best to run across the lunar surface, which wasn't very good at all. After months in low gravity without her spacesuit, she had completely forgotten how to move with additional weight. She only made it 10 steps before she stumbled and fell onto her stomach. "Oof!" she cried, and then tried to get up, and failed at that, too. Instead, she could only wiggle her arms and legs around uselessly like a turtle flipped on its back.
Dad, help! I'm stuck!
Now, even though she'd only gone 10 steps, those were 10 low-gravity steps, which had still carried her a good distance from the airlock. She lay on the ground in the direction Dad and I had gone to play catch, away from the small crowd by the base. I took my time heading over to her, partly because any time she was on her stomach was time she wasn't running off somewhere else, and partly because the sight of her writhing around was kind of funny. "Didn't Dad just tell you to stay close?"
I am close, Violet protested.
"You were running away."
I was trying to have fun. Dad didn't say we couldn't have fun.
"Well, you're welcome to have fun out here, but you have to be careful."
I was being careful.
"No, you weren't. You can't just run off. You have to stay with me. And you have to go slowly at first until you get the hang of things. You don't want to make a mistake out here." I knelt down to help Violet back to her feet. And then I froze, struck by a thought. We didn't want to make mistakes on the surface because mistakes could be deadly. And yet Lars Schoberg had survived for the opposite reason. Whoever had tried to kill him had made a mistake.
"Dash!" Violet yelped. "Why aren't you helping me?"
Sorry, I said, turning my attention to her. Her little arms and legs were windmilling wildly. "I was thinking about something."
"What?"
"Well, Chang said that if he had wanted to kill Lars, he wouldn't have made any mistakes. But whoever actually tried to kill Lars got it wrong. They didn't use the right amount of poison."
"So?"
I couldn't simply grab onto Violet's suit and haul her to her feet. My thick gloves made it hard to get a purchase most places, and I didn't want to use one of the many tubes coming out the back of the suit. They controlled things like her air supply and temperature regulation, and if I accidentally pulled one of those free, Violet would be in serious trouble. Instead, I needed Violet's help to get her to her feet again. I needed her to roll onto her back, as that would make it easier for her to hold on to me. So I wiggled my arms into the moon dust beneath her belly. Whoever tried to kill Lars went through an awful lot of trouble, I explained. They had to steal the apple seeds, and then they had to make the cyanide, and then they had to poison the lutefisk without being seen. Injecting the right amount of poison, that should have been the easy part, and that's where they made their mistake.
Maybe there weren't enough seeds to make enough poison,
Violet said. With a heave, I flipped Violet onto her back. Well, maybe, but what would be the point of only partly poisoning someone?
Maybe the person hated Lars, but they didn't want to be a murderer.
I don't think so, I said. I think that they must have...
Dash!
Violet screamed suddenly.
Look out!
A shadow fell over me. My reflex was to spin around, but that was almost impossible to do in a spacesuit, especially from a kneeling position. I couldn't even turn my head to look behind me. I felt something tug on the back of my suit. A second later, an alarm sounded inside my helmet. Warning, the same calm, computerized voice from the base announced. Your oxygen hose has been detached. If it isn't reconnected in 3 minutes, you will asphyxiate. Now, I knew the hose couldn't have simply come loose. My family and I had checked it 4 times, making sure that it was tightly attached. Whoever was behind me had pulled it out on purpose. Someone was trying to kill me.